of the Bootstrap framework, and in particular about the latest version of Bootstrap, Bootstrap 4, and how you can use it to build responsive and mobile-first sites. Now, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about myself and about Wintlect. Since you're here, I'm assuming that you're somewhat familiar with Wintlect, but you may only be familiar with one of the things Wintlect does. Wintlect is known for consulting and training. We have instructor-led training as well as on-demand training through Wintlect Now, which is our online subscription-based video service. Wintlect is a Microsoft Gold certified partner and has been Microsoft's #1 training vendor for over 15 years. In addition to our experience with .NET and Windows, we also have expertise in many other areas like cloud, DevOps, data, artificial intelligence, and web and mobile development as well, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Wintlect's founders are industry influencers and have over 30 books between them. And I won't address this slide for now, but for those in the audience that stay here to the end, we'll have some free services and discounts that you can take advantage of if you're interested. I'll show this again at the end of the webinar. I'm Chris Minnick. I'm an author and trainer. I'm specializing in web and mobile web development. I've written several books, including JavaScript for Dummies, HTML and CSS for Dummies, JavaScript for Kids, and around 10 others. I have 20 years of experience as a full-stack web developer, meaning I do both server-side as well as client-side web development. And I've been a trainer for over 10 years, specializing in JavaScript frameworks. React in particular is something I'm focusing on quite a bit right now. Bootstrap, what I'm going to be talking about today, is the most popular front-end CSS and JavaScript framework for designing responsive websites. According to w3text.com, approximately 20% of websites currently use Bootstrap. So there's a good chance that if you've done any type of work on the web, you've encountered Bootstrap. But before we begin, I'd like to get a sense of your experience level with Bootstrap. So I'm going to pause here and put up a survey question. Okay, great. It looks like we have a lot of experience with Bootstrap 3. And so this is going to be a perfect talk for you. I'm going to explain what the main differences between Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4 are, and talk about what's involved in the upgrade process, things to look out for with regards to that. So let's talk first about what we mean by responsive and mobile first. One of the main ideas in responsive design is that content should be like water. Bruce Lee said it best: you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teacup, it becomes the teacup. So in the same way, your content should flow in your design as your design responds to different devices and screen sizes. Rather than having a fixed desktop website, a mobile website, and so forth, your content should respond to different devices. In the old days of web design, mobile devices were like an afterthought. It was difficult to add new functionality to a mobile phone, and mobile web browsers couldn't do very much. So most mobile websites were just lists of links and text, because that's just about all the typical phone could handle. When web developers decided to start supporting mobile phones, they generally thought of them as stripped down versions of the real website. starting with a desktop version of a site and scaling it down to create the mobile version in what we call graceful degradation. This desktop first design technique was popular and useful in the days before smartphones with advanced web browsers. And the idea was that you should design your web app for the latest desktop web browser, but in such a way that it still worked at least a little bit when someone visited from using a mobile device. Mobile first web design, on the other hand, means that you think about web applications as mobile web apps first and as sites on a desktop browser second. So rather than taking away functionality for less capable devices, we're now starting with the most core content and functionality, and we add on functionality for more capable devices. This idea is called progressive enhancement. So desktop first and graceful degradation on the left are like trying to make a cupcake out of a wedding cake. It's not cost effective for most of your users who may be on mobile devices, and you can only do it by creating a lot of waste, and your cupcake isn't going to look very good in the end. Mobile first is like making cupcakes. Once you have the cupcakes, you can build a wedding cake out of them if you need to. And so I want to do another poll here just to make sure you got the main points of mobile first. And right there. Great. And yeah, the actual correct answer for that is all three of those. Mobile first development is cost effective, it improves the mobile user experience, and it focuses on your core content. Bootstrap was created in 2010, and it served as the style guide for the development of internal tools for Twitter at the time. When it was released as an open source framework in 2011, it quickly became one of the most popular open source projects in the world. And it's now the de facto standard for grid layouts and responsive design. Version 3 of Bootstrap was the first responsive version, and it was a standard version for about 5 years, which makes it very, very widely deployed right now. And upgrading to Bootstrap 4 is something that millions of websites are now facing. Unless you've been paying close attention, you may not be aware of the differences between Bootstrap 3 and 4 and the issues that will likely determine whether you should upgrade or use Bootstrap 4 for a new website. So I'm going to cover many of these differences in this webinar, but first let's back up a little bit and talk more about what Bootstrap is and how it works. So whereas other frameworks are more concerned with managing the updating of data in the browser and communication with the web server, Bootstrap's primarily concerned with making dynamic websites look good. Bootstrap provides standard and easy to use ways to create websites that work well on mobile devices as well as on desktop. It also contains a set of components for accomplishing common tasks like making a navigation bar, hiding and showing content, making alert and pop-up windows, styling buttons, and more. Many web developers, including myself, use Bootstrap with frameworks like Angular, React, or Vue.js, or with a content management system such as WordPress. And so let's do another poll here. Yes, exactly. Bootstrap is mainly focused on solving the problem of browser styling inconsistencies and making some really common tasks very easy to accomplish. And if you've worked with Bootstrap or you propose using Bootstrap these days, you'll probably hear the complaint that all Bootstrap sites look the same. And to a certain extent, this is true, but it's by design. The whole idea behind Bootstrap, after all, is to provide standard ways to do things. But the similarity in many Bootstrap sites is also partially a result of it being so easy to use that you can usually just copy and paste code from the examples provided by Bootstrap to accomplish what you need. And many people do just that. What I like to tell people is that no, all Bootstrap sites don't look the same, it's just the poorly built ones. Here are some screenshots of several sites that use Bootstrap where it might not be immediately apparent, but in each case, these sites take advantage of the responsive features of Bootstrap while not being stereotypical Bootstrap sites. Bootstrap is made up of two components, the Bootstrap CSS and the Bootstrap JavaScript. When you download the Bootstrap source code, you'll see a lot of different files that go into making the final framework, including the Sass code, which you can modify to customize Bootstrap, and the documentation and examples. But what you use on your site is just a single minified CSS file and a single minified JavaScript file. I'm going to switch over to my code editor here and just show you what the downloads of Bootstrap 4 looks like. So this is the Bootstrap 4 source code here. And it contains a lot of configuration files and build files. But what you actually deploy to your site is usually just this bootstrap.min.css, which is, let's see, around, I think 120K. And then the JavaScript file right here, bootstrap min.js, which is around 50K. You also need jQuery on your site, and so that adds about 87K. So all told, using Bootstrap adds about 300 kilobytes to your page. So that's good to know, and depending on how you feel about that, that may make a difference. Bootstrap can be used for layout, typography, for accomplishing certain common CSS tasks in an easy and cross-browser way, and to create cross-browser and interactive components. I'm going to go over each of these categories of Bootstrap functions over the next few slides. But let's look at another poll here. Just what is Bootstrap most concerned with? Yeah, and so if you said style and appearance, that's exactly correct. There are interactive components of Bootstrap for making common UI controls, but most of what Bootstrap does is just controlling how the page is presented on different screen sizes. Bootstrap uses a 12-column grid. What this means is that you tell Bootstrap how many of its 12 columns you want a piece of content to take up at different browser sizes. There are always 12 virtual columns there in Bootstrap, but your content may span any number of those depending on the size of the screen or the size of the browser window. Since Bootstrap is mobile first, the default is to display everything at a 12-column width. And you can see that if you look at a Bootstrap site. Let's look at the examples here. This one, for example. If I scale the browser down to a small size, everything stacks into one column here. As you expand to larger sizes, then it will spread things out into more columns, and this is all configured using Bootstrap CSS. And then these widths at which it changes from one layout to another that's called a breakpoint. And Bootstrap has breakpoints starting with extra small, which is the default for mobile devices and profile orientation, all the way up to XL, which is a new size just for this introduced in Bootstrap 4, which is for widescreen monitors. Oh, and importantly, in version 4 of Bootstrap, the way that layouts are done now uses Flex, which is the modern CSS way of doing layouts. In previous versions, it used floats, which is a little more tricky. Flex is fantastically simple and powerful, and now Bootstrap's layout engine is based on Flex. Bootstrap sets some better looking defaults for typography from the browser defaults, and it makes using different typographical effects easier than it is without Bootstrap. There are some key differences between how Bootstrap 4 handles typography and how Bootstrap 3 did it. The big two differences are that the default font size in Bootstrap 3 was 14 pixels, and the default in Bootstrap 4 is 16 pixels. So that's the normal browser default size. The other big difference is that Bootstrap 4 uses rem units for margins, and combined, these two can really cause some problems if you're upgrading to Bootstrap 4 from Bootstrap 3. So I'm going to show you an example of a site that was an example from Bootstrap 3, and then I upgraded it to Bootstrap 4 without changing anything about it. Let's see, so this is the initial site. This is a Bootstrap 3 example site. Uses navigation on the left. It has a top navigation bar. It has some images here and a table, and you can scale it down. And it works as you would expect, scaling down to the one column view and then scaling back up to the desktop view. If you just swap out the version of Bootstrap that you're using without changing any of the code, things get pretty weird. So I took the Bootstrap 3 page and I just swapped in the new version of Bootstrap. And our navigation at the top is missing now. Our left navigation is messed up. Everything is kind of messed up here. And this needs some work in order to be compatible with Bootstrap 4. And besides some things changing about the language of Bootstrap, the big differences are that we're now using rem units for margins, and the default font size has changed. So I want to talk a little bit about M and rem, so I can make sure that everyone really understands the difference here. This example here shows an HTML list where we have a paragraph, some text outside of the paragraph, an HTML list, and that list has a sublist, and then that sublist has a sublist. I've styled it using CSS here, setting the default font size for the whole page to 100%. So that will be 16 pixels here in Bootstrap 4. And then set the paragraph to 2 rem, and also the same size on the UL and the LI. So everything here is the same size. And the reason there is because rem is root M. So this is a relative unit. We're saying that it's twice the size of the root element. So the root element in HTML is the HTML element. So right here, paragraph, UL, and LI are all twice the size of the root. So paragraph, list item, sublist, all the same. M units on the other hand, which are used by Bootstrap 3 and previous, are relative to their parent. So if we change these to M units, then you'll see that things change quite a bit in our page. And what's happening here is we have this compounding effect of M, where we have our default font size, and then we have a paragraph that's twice the size of that. And then we have a list item that's twice the size of its parent, UL. And then we have a sublist item, which is twice the size of its parent. And then we have a sublist of that sublist, which is twice the size of that one. And so in M, if you're not careful, you can get into this compounding problem, and you can have a really confusing situation. With rem units, you can always count on things being consistent because they're relative to the root. And so in Bootstrap 4, rem units are used for margins, which makes controlling how far apart nested elements are much easier. So I think I have a quick poll here, which this should be pretty easy at this moment. Yes, exactly. Rem units are relative to the root element, and in HTML, that root element is the HTML element. Bootstrap has components which make many common interactive elements easier to create. So you've already seen some examples like navigation. There are others like alerts and buttons, badges, breadcrumbs, carousel. These are JavaScript components. They're interactive things that you can put into your website in a responsive way just by using CSS classes. So back to my editor, we can see, let's see. I have this sample document here, and you can see that everything in here, there's no script in here. There's no JavaScript controlling how things are laid out. And the only style sheet that's included is the Bootstrap style. So this is using Bootstrap 4. All the styling in Bootstrap is done using CSS classes. And that includes the functional interactive components such as the navbar. And this line right here is showing the CSS classes used to create a navbar. And I'm going to open up this in my browser. And so here's that page. We have this navbar up here, and it contains a drop-down. It has an input field. It has a search box with a hover. And if I shrink this down to mobile size, it collapses into a mobile view. And then I can expand it, and it becomes a widescreen full navbar again. Bootstrap makes it possible to do this with just a few CSS classes or class attribute values here. So we're using navbar to create the navbar itself. We're using navbar expand LG to tell it to expand to the full desktop size at the LG breakpoint. So the LG breakpoint is this width right here. So I think that's 900 and something pixels. And then expands, this would be the LG all the way up to the XL size, which is somewhere around here. And then this is the small size all the way up to LG. We'll use the mobile navbar. And then the next two values here, navbar dark and BG dark, just control how the navbar is styled. And then we have other navbar CSS classes here, which control things like saying that certain things are links or nav items. Here we're creating the drop-down, and then we're creating a drop-down menu, drop-down items. And then the box below the nav bar is called the Jumbotron, and that's this giant thing here. And these are all Bootstrap components that do certain things, and you can control them just by using CSS classes, which is kind of handy for those of us who really can't stand working with CSS. So let's move on. Bootstrap also has some utilities which make CSS styles easier, and you can do it all with class attribute values, just like the components. And this is one of the things that makes Bootstrap so powerful, as I mentioned. You can avoid having to work with CSS. You can easily switch the classes on and off using JavaScript to control the CSS and control the appearance of your website. And Bootstrap abstracts away the CSS and the JavaScript, so you can just focus on the set of predefined attribute values. You can customize Bootstrap using the Sass when you build Bootstrap. So if you wanted to start with your own build of Bootstrap that was customized for your company, you could modify the SCSS files here to change what alerts look like for your company. You could change what buttons look like by default. Maybe you'd like your buttons to be more rounded on the corners than Bootstrap's default, or slightly bigger. You can change all that here, and then you build the CSS from the SCSS, and you can have your own customized company version of Bootstrap. So I'm going to show off a few more features here of Bootstrap inside of this sample document. So you saw the Jumbotron, and below that we have the container, and the container is the container for grid layouts. Inside of the grid layout, you have rows, and then you have columns. And here's an example of using a column inside of the 12-column grid. This is saying that at the size LG, which we saw is somewhere around 1,000 pixels wide, this column is going to display in 6 columns. So that's about half the screen. So if we look at this page in the browser, you can see right up here, this column here is taking up about half the screen, and we used another style right here, text center, to center it inside of the row. So this is an LG6, and then over here we have 3, and over here we have 3, and we could have additional content on the sides of this, but right now it's just 6 columns of content centered inside of the 12-column grid. And then below that we have another row where we have col MD4, and then col MD4, and then another col MD4. So we have 3 4-column grids inside of the 12-column layout, and here they are right here. And then inside of those we have some images, and we have cards. And cards are also new in Bootstrap 4. These are just an easy way to arrange content that may have an image and a title and description inside of a box. And so you just basically, this is a good way to create the visual display of a web component. So you may have just a piece here that you want to be movable to anywhere, and it's sort of a unit. This might be, in this case, some sort of advertisement or a picture with a caption and a title and a button, or it could be a survey question or anything like that. And it's just cards make it possible for you to easily style it in a way that you can move around into other places or turn on and turn off. And so here's the code for a card. You use class equals card, and then we have card image top for that image that's at the top of it, and then card body with the card title and card text. And then under that we have, this is a list item in here, and then a couple of links inside that card as well. And then down here we just have 3 columns of content. And this uses just simple divs that are styled using rows with column D4 inside of them. Down here, there's buttons, and Bootstrap has this idea of contextual classes for colors. And so here, this one's styled as blue here, this one's styled as green. And the way those are done, let's see, is by, there they are. This one is button info, and this one's button success. There are other contextual classes which associate colors with words, and we could change this one to button danger and then refresh, and now this one is red. Or we could change it to button warning, and now it's yellow. And you can, again, change these colors, what color is what is associated with what word, by creating your own custom build of Bootstrap. Bootstrap has some requirements to use it. jQuery is one of them, and Bootstrap 4 now supports new versions, 3.x of jQuery. And so this is important because versions prior to 3.x, or the old 1.8 versions of jQuery, have some security faults, and there are some problems with them, other problems with them. And if you're using Bootstrap 3, you may not be using a secure and new version of jQuery. And so this is an important consideration when considering whether you're going to upgrade, is are you stuck with an old version of jQuery because you're using an old version of Bootstrap. Bootstrap also requires popper.js, which is a new requirement for Bootstrap 4. And this handles things like alert messages and modals, any kind of pop-up window. In previous versions, this code was all inside of Bootstrap. Now it's been abstracted, it's been taken out, and now in addition to smaller font size or file size as a result, we also have better support for managing how these poppers are displayed and how text is aligned in those poppers and where they appear on screen. The popper.js library just does a much better job than what Bootstrap could do by itself. One of the things that you also want to consider in whether you're going to upgrade to Bootstrap 4 is, do you need to support IE 9 or earlier? And this actually should say, okay, so yes, IE 9 or greater is supported by Bootstrap 4. That's correct. Bootstrap 4 drops support for IE 9 and earlier. And so if you need to support IE 9, then you're not going to be able to use Bootstrap 4. Thankfully, we're starting to pull away from needing to support IE 9 in more and more cases, so that's a good thing. Bootstrap 4 also uses auto prefixer, which uses can I use to add vendor prefixes when they're necessary. And so that's really handy too. But if you need IE 8 or 9 support, then you're going to have to stick with Bootstrap 3. So we're getting near the end here. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Let's see. I don't have any more polls. Well, let me tell you a little bit more. Think about if you have questions. And I want to talk a little bit more about the special offers for attendees. Oh, wait, I do see some questions here. So we'll get to those in the next screen. So as attendees of this webinar, you're eligible for some special offers. In particular, we're offering a 10% discount on any public virtual Microsoft online course. And you can see our catalog at wintlect.com/mock. And we're also offering a discount on training related to the new Microsoft role-based certifications. We have an app dev briefing or Q&A that you can schedule with us, and you can get discount on certification exam vouchers. And if you're interested in any of these, please reach out to Martha Guerin, and her email address is right there. So let me go on to the next slide here and answer some of your questions. Okay, so we have one here. If you don't want something to show up on a mobile site, that is only show on desktop, how would you do that in Bootstrap? The most common way is to use JavaScript. There's some noise there. JavaScript to turn on and off the display of the item, and so you can use hide, I think is the class name, and I would just use JavaScript to, let's see, what is it? Just add a class under certain circumstances at certain sizes, for example. And that is something where you probably use a combination of JavaScript and Bootstrap, because there's really no explicit responsive utility class for show and hide in Bootstrap. And then let's see, upgrade. What are the upgrade gotchas? I covered that. Your version of jQuery, for example, is a big one. And then the spacing issue, rem versus m, that's one that you really have to look out for. And then there's just some of the other things having to do with Flexbox versus fluid, or versus the floats. So it's not an easy upgrade by any stretch of the imagination, but it can be done. And there are some tools out there that I've found that will just go through and search and replace to find old Bootstrap 3 code and replace it with Bootstrap 4 code. And this can be a good start, but it's not going to work quite the same because of problems like the font size being different and margins being calculated using a different kind of a unit. So I'd say start with an automated tool and then move on to individual cases and knowing how things are done, especially with rem versus m. Can you describe more about Flex layout? Sure. Yeah, Flex layout creates a box. So we create with Flex. Let's see if I have an example here. Okay, there is a page here at csstricks.com, which has a really good tutorial for Flexbox. Let me resize my monitor here. Yeah, that'll work, kind of. And you can create a box with Flexbox that can be vertical or horizontal. In this case, we have a horizontal container, and then you can have items inside of it called flex items. And so these are your flex items. And when you arrange them inside, when you put them inside of a flex container, they'll be arranged inside of it or distributed inside of that container according to the flex direction. And you can do things with Flexbox, such as changing the order of the flex items, just very easily by just changing some numbers and changing some simple CSS properties. Bootstrap makes it much easier to change the flex direction and flex order than it is to do it just using standard CSS. but there are times when you'll need to use CSS, just the low-level CSS code, to implement things just because of styles that Bootstrap doesn't have utilities for. But this is the basic idea, is that you have either a horizontal or a vertical container, and you put things into it, and those things become items. So if I put 5 divs into a Flex container, then those divs would be spread out according to their sizes, according to how I specified the order on them, and so forth inside of that Flex box. And then you can do Flex wrap too if you wanted to have Flex items that were arranged either vertically or horizontally, and have them at the end of the screen wrap onto the next line. And I really recommend looking at this CSS tricks /snippets/CSS/ a guide to Flexbox to learn more about how Flexbox works. And then you can go to the Bootstrap site, and you can see from there what the Bootstrap Flexbox capabilities are. So inside of Utilities, here we are. You can see what Bootstrap classes there are to control Flexbox. And so all you need to do in Bootstrap to create a Flexbox is just say dflex. And so that's going to just change the display of this container into a Flexbox. And that will make every box inside of that box, inside of the container, become a Flex item. So as in this case. And you can also change the direction of items in a Flexbox, which is fantastic as well, and was not possible at all using the old method of doing floats. Next question. Okay, this question says, on a normal monitor, Bootstrap seems to have an excessive amount of empty space to the left of the first column and to the right of the last column. How can that wasted space be reduced and cross an entire application? Great question, and there's actually a simple class for doing this. So in this sample here, if we go up to the top here, and I'm going to find that container right here. So we have div class equals container. I'm going to change this to container fluid. And so now if I go back to the browser and find that sample page and then reload, this is now a fluid layout, which means it goes from edge to edge, and it changes size as I scale downward. The breakpoints still apply, so when I get to below the LG size here, it's going to switch to the small layout, the single column layout. But it's container fluid that makes the Bootstrap page stretch all the way to the edges. And you can control this margin over here if you want it even less, and this margin over here by adjusting the default margin on the body element. Hopefully that answers your questions. And then, what are the major advantages of Flex layout? I think I've covered that one already. The major advantages are being able to change the direction of how the content flows, being able to reorder the items in the content, reorder the items inside of the box, the Flex box. It's a simpler way of doing layout, and it has a lot more flexibility in terms of options controlling how your content is justified inside of the box as well. I think I can get a few more questions here. So is it true that there's another approach? Is there another approach to customizing Bootstrap 4? You can use a custom style sheet that you include after Bootstrap. So if we have this page here, and we had the Bootstrap file being included, you could just put in another CSS file right here, which overrides things from Bootstrap, or you could create your own SCSS file and have that be included inside of Bootstrap, and so just have one single file that overrides other things where you keep all of your changes. And if you do it that way, then you avoid creating a custom version of Bootstrap, but you still have all of your code in a place where it can be compiled into Bootstrap. And then let's see. Media queries. Bootstrap, this question, don't we have media queries for just mobile devices? Bootstrap's default is the extra small size, which is for mobile devices. And then Bootstrap is just abstracting away the complexity of using media queries at the larger sizes. And so it is using media queries, but it's making the use of media queries a little bit simpler for you. And then, let's see, yeah, there's some other questions here about media queries. We're sort of running low on time, but the default breakpoint for columns. What is the default breakpoint for columns? If you only specify col LG6, what does it look like on smaller devices? So if you, the default breakpoint is the col XS. So if you have something, like let's say in this example page here, if let's see. Well, right here in this one, if I remove these classes from here, and so now I just have a row with just a div inside of it, and then I look at this in the browser, it's going to, that's this one here, it's going to now take up all 12 columns, no matter what the width of the browser is. So if the browser is at full desktop size here, it takes up 12 columns. And then if I shrink it down to mobile size, the XS size, it's going to display at 12 columns. Everywhere in between, it's at 12 columns. And remember, Bootstrap is mobile first, and so 12 columns is always the default. And you can assume that there is col XS12. You could specify that in every container if you wanted, but this is just implied all the time. And so here, if we wanted to, at medium size, which is about the size of a tablet computer, if we wanted to change it to 8 columns, we could do it like that. If we wanted, then we have the LG, and we could display it LG6 like it was. Or if you wanted the XL size to be just 4, we could do that. And so remember that we always start with the smallest. So the default is XS, and we work up from there. This question is comment on using Bootstrap with other JavaScript frameworks, React, Angular, etc. Let's see, I think I have an example I can show here really quick. Not there. So I use Bootstrap with React all the time to just do the global styling of the application. So anything that's going to apply to all of my React components, I use Bootstrap for. Inside of React components, I'll use just React styling or style components to do my styling. And I find that this method works really well because I simplify greatly the amount of styling that I have to do to everything. I just use Bootstrap for it. I mean, and so that's really handy. I have been working on an application using Vue, and we've been using Bootstrap for it. And you can see when I pull this up. One second. So this is a Vue component, and this one isn't doing it. In some of these, where is that? Okay, an app here. I have, where is it? I'll use local styles here, just using regular CSS. But then for larger things, such as the layout between components and so forth, I'll use Bootstrap. And so this one is just an example app that I'm building for a course I'm writing, which includes Bootstrap. And then inside of the components, it uses Bootstrap just to lay out things right here. So we're using Flexbox, FlexWrap, just to lay out these images inside of the thing, inside of the view. So that's how I do it. Global styles use Bootstrap. Local styles use regular CSS or CSS components. Okay, yeah, and then George posted here some code for using media query to hide or to just change something based on the width. And that's a great way to do it too. You can just say, when the max width is this, apply this style. You could apply a style of display none to an element or to a component using styles like that. We've got 5 minutes here. Modal dialogues. Let's see. Modals, you can see great examples of how to use modals right in here. They are a component, meaning they have JavaScript functionality built in. And this is the basic code. You just say my modal here, so this references an ID, and then you use .on, so it's just the jQuery on, and then we say shown, trigger the focus of this, and so this will do some animation to open a modal. You can have buttons on your modals for closing them, doing other things, and here's a demo modal. And you can animate the way they come in and out too, which is pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, and then George posted another one here. Can you all see that code? You should be able to see it. And then the question, how should I compare Bootstrap to prime faces? I haven't actually used prime faces, so I can't answer that one, unfortunately. And then there's some other examples here for how to hide things. And then can we use Bootstrap with ASP and .NET? Yes, absolutely. And people are doing that all the time. It's CSS and JavaScript. So anywhere you would use CSS and JavaScript, you can use Bootstrap. And then do you have a Popper example? Popper itself is just being used by Bootstrap. So it's being used for doing these modals. It's being used for doing the titles and tooltips. So here are tooltips we can hover over. And so this is all being controlled by Popper.js. And the tooltips titles are similar, where you can hover over and get additional help. So Popper replaces modal. Popper is just being used to create that modal, actually. In this question, Chris, do you agree with Bootstrap maintainers that stacked modals lead to a bad user experience? I would say so. I think generally we're moving away from pop-ups. I think stack. You want to just look at these things and use them in the most user-friendly way. Modals, I think, are going away for most cases. I mean, except for, and sometimes I can see a use for them when you're saving inside of an application. But on a general public website, I tend to avoid using modals. And then let's see if there are any other questions. I think that's about it. I hope this has been helpful to everyone. Keep in mind, we do have these special offers. It was great to see so many people come to this webinar. And thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.